All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 41 of the MV Red podcast. My name is Michael. Joining me is my co host, Dane, and we got a lot to unpack. It was another adventurous week in the political world. Just when you thought last weekend couldn't get crazy, it got crazier this weekend with President Joe Biden on Sunday afternoon, I think, around 1:30, 2 o'clock, something like that, Sunday afternoon, tweeting out a letter on Twitter there that he was going to drop out of the race. And shortly thereafter, he put out a tweet endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris. And so we'll get into that tonight. We're going to talk about everything that went down there with Joe Biden dropping out, because up until Sunday morning on the talk shows, they were talking about him staying in the race. So we'll kind of dive in a little bit as to why we think he dropped out. And we're going to talk about Kamala Harris, or Kamala, or I heard Mika Brzezinski this morning on Morning Joe say that the right wing purposely misspeaks her, or whatever the word is, can't pronounce her name properly, and it's insulting. Yet I heard a tweet, or I heard a video of her the other day where she definitely says, "I'm Kamala Harris." So is it Kamala? Is it Kamala? Is it Kamala? That's the $1,000,000 question, Dane, isn't it?
Um, I'm laughing because I'm so afraid to talk because I literally don't want to commit a hate crime, right? And I'm afraid that if I say her name, I'm going to say it incorrectly. What's ironic is that I do believe, and I could do some research on this, but I don't have the time, so you're just going to have to take my word for it. I do believe that she herself has changed the pronunciation of her own name because I think it used to be Kamala, and I think she went by Kamala Harris. And then it became Kamala Harris, and that was the new it's Kamala. It's not Kamala, it's Kamala. And now what I'm hearing is that it's like a like Kamala, Kamala Harris, Kamala Harris. I'm not doing that intentionally. So I don't know, and I'm just afraid. I feel like I'm in the Soviet Union and I don't know what the latest party line is, and I'm afraid to like speak my mind because if I'm using the old pronunciation of her name, they're gonna send me to the gulag, right? Where I'm gonna get trans, and they're gonna like re-educate me and melt my brain. So I don't know. I just have to make this observation though, Michael. I know you're very excited. I feel the energy from you, Michael Metzinger, in the political energy, like you've caught the bug. You have firmly caught the bug. You're like updating the Facebook group. You're hyping up the podcast. Like I, the people who are listening can't see the show notes, but you have like detailed show notes. You've been tweeting on Twitter. You're back. Like this is it's exciting to me to see Michael Metzinger, middle class, father of two, back in the political game. This is a good sign.
I am back, Dane. And I'm ready to go. I think we talked about it last episode. It's one of those things where politics, it kind of comes and goes, comes and
Yeah.
goes. But this year of all years, if somebody had somewhat of an interest in politics, and if you're not fully into it by now, I don't know what other event needs to happen. I mean, you had a near assassination of the former president, and you have
Yeah.
the current president catching COVID, sending this letter out on a Sunday afternoon. It looks like Gabriel in the chat says 1:46 on Sunday.
Yeah.
Posts it, and he drops out. So there's so much madness, and then all while the former president was just convicted of 34 felonies,
Yeah.
34 counts in a felony case, and still await sentencing. And there's some other trials or court cases that may or may not happen. So we have that going for us. So it's been a crazy summer. So I'm definitely I dove headfirst right back in. I'm ready to go.
You
And
got the
so
mic ready. You bought a
I
podcasting mic,
I
right?
got this like a few years ago. That was during 2020 when we did some wish casting of hoping Trump was going to
Yeah.
find a way to defy the polls and win. It didn't happen, but
Yeah.
uh,
Um,
but but
so
but, but we tried.
so here's kind of where I'm at, Michael. And it's crazy that it's like 1 week ago that former president and current presidential candidate was like almost assassinated, right? And it just kind of just goes down the memory hole. But um, I mean, there's the Biden not running again, and Miss Harris, Madam Harris, taking the reins is an incredible transition of power. And I'm immediately reminded of the Soviet Union, right? Where in the Soviet Union, you ostensibly had elections, you had a party that had like local elections, and then the party leaders would choose the head of the party. But the reality was that there was an oligarchy that kind of controlled the decisions. They would pick the new chairman, and then they would present that chairman to the people, and the people just had to suck it up and accept it. Um, and the other thing that, and especially in the late stage of the Soviet Union, all their leaders were like 70, 80 years old, right? And I'm watching this go on with Biden, and it's just very Soviet-esque. And I'm gonna make a couple of observations, and then I'll pause. One is, I find it deeply ironic and actually very satisfying that it was COVID ostensibly. Who knows if that's really what happened? We can get there more on that in a moment. But it was COVID that took down Biden. If you recall, Biden was elected to stop COVID. And, we've memory hold COVID, but I'm gonna bring it up again and again and again till I'm blue in the face because, 1, they said if you take this vaccine, you're not gonna get COVID again. Clearly, that was proven to be false. Then they said if you take this vaccine, COVID's not gonna be that effective. Clearly, that's proven to be false. And then they said, well, Trump is mismanaging COVID. COVID could go away if only for Biden being the president, right? Like, I don't know how you take a virus and make it go away. But if we just lock down, we put masks on little kids, we vax everybody, and we wear masks 24/7, COVID's gonna go away, and we gotta vote for Joe Biden while we're at it. And, like, it's ironic, it's poetic, it's Shakespearean that it was COVID that brought Biden down. He's had it 3 times. He's had it 3 times. Like, what's going on? I've had it 1 time. I had it 1 time. Like, that's the ultimate, like, you guys were wrong in 2020 and 2021. Like, Biden had it 3 times. What's going on there, right? I don't know. Like, isn't that ridiculous? So that's 1. 2 is he was clearly forced out. Like, e everybody was putting the pressure on him. Pelosi, Obama, everybody. The Clintons were all putting pressure on him to step down. He didn't wanna do it. He didn't wanna do it. He didn't wanna step down at all. And I think what happened is they waited for him to have a health episode. And, they said he had COVID, and maybe he did. Maybe he had something else, but he clearly had some sort of severe health episode. He was probably totally out of it. And while he was gone, it's like they did a palace coup, and they basically tweeted out, "I'm no longer running for president anymore," right? "I'm still gonna be the president, but I'm no longer running for president." And then the other thing that was Soviet about it, and this rant's gonna end, so just give me a couple more minutes. The other thing that was
You're
vaguely
good.
about it was, like, the Democrats all of a sudden started posting, like, "Joe Biden's a hero. Joe Biden's this, like, wondrous hero." Like, 2 minutes ago, they were like, "He's old, he needs to step down." And then he gets forced out. I don't believe he willingly did that. And then, like, the party line immediately changed in real time, and they started, like, spouting the same talking point, like, "He's a hero." He's not a hero, he's a villain in this matter. Like, if you believe the Democratic rhetoric that Trump is a fascist and a threat to democracy, Biden is a villain in that story because Biden's own, um, stonewalling and his own arrogance, and his own stubbornness meant that he refused to step down. He clearly wasn't capable of being president 2 or 3 years ago. The other thing that's crazy is, like, there was a Wall Street Journal article, and they were now that, like, this is the cover's been blown for Biden, like, all the truth is coming out, and they're like, in October of 2021, so 3 years ago, he had this meeting with congressional leaders. He rambled on, and then Pelosi gets on the line, is like, "This is what we actually have to do," and then he never had another meeting since then. So he wasn't like the actual president. We have been governed by an oligarchy and a clique with Biden as the nominal figurehead. And I know that sounds very conspiratorial, but that's the reality and that's the best description of the facts. And the Democratic Party is responsible for this. Like they should be ashamed of themselves. They should be absolutely ashamed of themselves because if you listen to their rhetoric and you believe them, you take them at their word that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy, they were willing to jeopardize democracy because to put up a senile old man and to not push him out. So I'll pause there. It's just incredible. It is.
It is fascinating. So we'll get into that tonight. We'll talk a little bit about Joe Biden
Joe
and
Biden.
Joe Biden, whatever. What do we call him? Grandpa Joe.
Senile Joe.
This,
Sleepy Joe.
yeah, Sleepy Joe. I should have known. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk a little bit about Kamala Harris and where things uh, really are going to stack up now. Now that it's a different race, instead of it being Trump Biden, it's Trump Kamala. How does that impact the electoral college map? And then we'll conclude the episode talking about Trump's vice presidential pick, JD Vance, because we didn't really have a chance last episode because we were unpacking the fact that we hadn't had an episode for 15 months. And so we were unpacking all of that. I'm just looking here in the private chat, Dane. I have no clue who this this random person is here.
I have no idea. Is this
I have
someone
no
joined?
clue. Yeah, we're just gonna get them out of here. Anyways, so throughout the episode tonight, last week, a lot of you added to the chat, and I see it's already active again tonight. I see Gabriel's in there, and somebody else, moving seven. They just made a note that the Culinary Workers Union, which has over 60,000 members in Las Vegas, just endorsed Trump's no tax on tips policy. So that's big for a state like Nevada that Trump did not win last time, but is looking to win this go around. And then I see Gabriel, you're adding in. So at any point throughout this evening, you want to add to the chat, whether you're on YouTube or Twitch, just please leave your comments. We'll be watching it throughout the evening, and we'll definitely add some of your comments. So let's dive into it. And I'm just getting distracted here by this. Whoever this what is this you, Dave?
No, I don't know.
Somebody has hacked our session, but don't worry, they are not going to be on camera. I don't know who what is, but somehow they found their way in. Anyways, let's get off of that and let's talk about this again. President Joe Biden on Sunday deciding that, despite saying for weeks that he was not going to back out, ultimately giving in to the media and to the Democrat elites, defying the will of the 14 plus million Democrat primary voters who wanted him as their nominee, and he backs away. And so it's just fascinating. First off, there are the reports that he has COVID, and now he is going to speak in on national TV tomorrow evening. So we'll see how that goes. But there's that aspect to it. Then the next aspect of, and I'm not trying to dive all in headfirst into conspiracy theories right now, folks. But then there's the whole aspect of the signature on it didn't really match up with some of his
No, it
signatures on
didn't.
on his
The B did
electoral.
not match.
Yeah, and then there's just the fact that he is the president of the United States, and we weren't getting daily updates truly on him. And people were genuinely concerned. Forget about the conspiracies for a second. The guy is 81. He's clearly had a cognitive decline. You could tell with just how he is and how he talks compared to where he was at even 4 years ago when you started to see the early glimpses of it, that his health is falling and he's been struggling. And for him to get COVID at his age, we could talk about COVID for people our age, but for somebody like who's 81, it's a little bit more serious. Maybe not so much in 2024 as it was a few years ago, but still for somebody in his condition who's not in the best of health. And just the fact that the media, there's just been kind of like a silence about it, has been kind of interesting. And so, needless to say, what I find fascinating about this is, quite frankly, and we talked about it last episode, I thought that Joe Biden actually was a stronger candidate than Kamala Harris. And we'll get into Kamala here in a second. And so, was it the Democrats just seeing these poll numbers, strictly looking at Biden's numbers and saying, hey, we stand no chance. And because you stand no chance, we're going to get beat up and down the ballot in the U.S. Senate races, in the U.S. House races, and in state legislature races and statewide races. Was that the angle? And that's why they wanted somebody like Kamala in there. And I guess, too, like, do they actually have polling that shows Kamala doing substantially better than Biden? I struggle to see it because what's interesting about this election cycle, Dane, is the fact that there's been a lot of polling done, not on just Trump versus Biden. There's been plenty of polling done, whether it's national or on a state by state level, of Trump versus Harris, something that's you typically wouldn't see, right? I mean, you just typically expect the top of the ticket to be polled, but there's been quite a bit of public polling, again, at the state and national level, comparing Trump versus Harris, and her numbers in the public polling in a number of different polling venues have not been good. So it makes you question, like, why it was, there's this huge rush to support Kamala now. And despite public polling showing that maybe she's even a worse candidate than Biden, or do they feel that maybe, yes, it's riskier to go with Kamala, but now we have some energy behind us, we have the money behind us, and maybe we won't get beat up and down the ballot. So, nonetheless, it's interesting for the Democrat Party to take this undemocratic approach to change the will again of the 14 plus million primary voters that supported Joe Biden. And we could talk, they could say all they want. Well, we didn't know about Joe Biden's mental decline. That's BS. They knew, and they've known for years about it. And they chose to just hopefully cover it up. I mean, that's what it seems like that they were trying to do. And they just thought that, well, Biden was able to beat Trump 4 years ago. I think he'll be able to do it again. And then that debate came, and we saw that mental and cognitive decline of Trump. And so, or not of Trump, I apologize, not of Trump, of Biden. And it just,
Uh,
certainly not Trump, of Biden. And it just went south. So I'm really curious of your take. Are you, from the perspective of the Democrat side, do you think Joe Biden is just a hero for America, a true statesman who said, you know what, all of a sudden, it clicked. I can't win. I want to look at my health and just retire and take care of myself and my family? Or do you think there was more to this as to why Joe Biden decided to back out?
no, he was cooed, and I don't mean like a literal coup, but like he was cooed by party leaders. Um, there's a great article or an essay rather by David Foster Wallace. It's actually about suicide, but he talks about in September 11th, there were people that were trapped in the towers where the flames were burning, and they eventually decided to jump. And why did they jump? Because the flames became so intense that they had two options: death by immolation versus jumping and certain doom, right? So, and he used that as that in the essay as a example of suicide. Like, why does somebody take suicide? Because life becomes so unbearable that they pick certain death over some unbearable state of existence. I go through that because I think that's what the Democratic Party faced. They the odds of Joe Biden winning were, I would say, 1 in 25%, maybe 10%. And they knew that enthusiasm had sagged. The man was clearly senile or suffering from some senility. Um, and they knew they were going to lose, and they lost enthusiasm on their side, and it was forced. And even though they've made Trump to be this great villain, Trump, his image has been softened. His favorabilities are some of the highest of any politician, and his net unfavorability score, which is still negative, is higher than Biden. It's higher than Kamala. So even though he's disliked less relative to other politicians. So facing this, I think that they knew they were going to lose, and they decided to roll the dice. In other words, the guys in the towers on September 11th, they decided to jump, right? And it was a random, it gave more variability to what was a definitive outcome, is how I would put it. So, with Kamala, they're still likely to lose, but their odds of losing now or their odds of winning are maybe 20%, right? 1 in 5. And already, I will say, there's been a surge of enthusiasm, which I think is genuine for Kamala. I think young people who saw 81-year-old Joe Biden now feel a little more involved, given that Kamala's 59, which is huge. And the donations have soared, and they feel that there's a chance that they could win. And I would expect to see in the next week or so that there will be a bump for Kamala in the polling. I think she'll increase relative to Trump. But can I make this point? When Biden was at the top of the ticket and Democrats were discussing an alternative, what they would frequently float were names like Gavin Newsom. This is coming from Democrats, not from Republicans. Gavin Newsom, Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, Fetterman, right? Mark Kelly. These were the names that the Democrats were floating. Gretchen Whitmer was a really popular name. People talked about her a lot. They never talked about Kamala. Now, Kamala has been anointed. She will be the candidate, but there's a reason they would skip over her. And the elephant in the room is that she's not a good politician. She's a bad politician, and she comes from California. She narrowly, this is incredible. Look up her election for Attorney General in the state of California. She narrowly won that. Okay, she became senator, and then she was chosen as a VP not because of any inherent expertise or skills, but to check, the diversity box. She was a woman and she was black, right? And Democrats have this very interesting relationship with DEI or affirmative action or whatever you want to call it, in which they'll say, like, we're excited to have a black woman president. Then if you say, well, the corollary to that is that you picked her because she is a black woman, they'll be like, how dare you say that? It's because she was a skilled prosecutor. Well, she only got her start in politics because she was having an affair or in a relationship with Willie Brown, right? So she is not a particularly, and like, she's being memed and she'll have the media cover for her, and she'll have a lot going for her, but she's not in and of herself a particularly dynamic politician. Um, she ran in the Democratic primary in 2020 and got like no votes, right? She dropped out because she was horrible. And I think, like, it's gonna be a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, but the realization is gonna set in, like, "Oh, maybe this isn't that much better of an alternative. Maybe we're in the same spot." And I think that they're testing her out, and the convention's not for 4 weeks. I think she's a trial balloon. If she shows some tightening of the race, then she'll stay in, and they'll take their chances. Um, if she doesn't show a tightening of the race, though, and she's still way behind Trump, I bet they axe even her, right? I mean, keep in mind, let's be very real what happened. The sitting president of the United States is not making the decisions. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is just reality. Joe Biden, his chief of staff, Hunter Biden, were controlling access to the president because he's 81 years old. He's senile, right? They didn't want him to step down. Jill likes playing first lady. Dr. Jill Biden, I'm sorry. Doctor. I can't. I know that's very important to her fragile ego. Um, and so, so she's Dr. Jill and the crew. They didn't want him to step down. He was basically incapacitated, and their hand was forced. Who knows the back office politics that got them there? And now he's not running again, and now Kamala has been anointed. But it's not like she's been thoroughly vetted, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot of hype. The one thing she does have going for her is that she will have a sycophantic media, because the media, we saw what happened when the media was fair to both sides. Biden crumbled, he just basically melted down, um, like a marshmallow at a campfire. If the media will not scrutinize Kamala, one, because she's a woman, and two, because she's black, they just won't. You're gonna have the media do, like, the most gross, nauseating stories praising her, and, like, any sort of criticism will be deflected as either racism or misogyny. Um, like, the fact, like, I feel like, I just made the point about Willie Brown. Like, she slept with Willie Brown, who was the mayor of San Francisco, to get appointed to cushy political jobs to start her career. Kamala Harris used sex to advance her political career. That's it. That's a fact. That's not like, and it is what it is. Look, if I were a woman, maybe I would be doing the same thing. This is a statement of fact. But, like, if you bring that up, the media will shut that down and be like, that is total misogyny. But no, it's like, it's factual information, right? We're not allowed to say that. One thing about Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher, oh, you hate women leaders. I love Margaret Thatcher. Nobody could argue that Thatcher used her sex to advance to the top of the political ladder, right? I mean, come on. But anyways, yeah, that's my take.
Good points. In the chat, Alpha Buckeye says Harris will get a bump with the media attention and publicity. That bump will fade before Labor Day, and I tend to agree there. But Dane, I think you touched on it. She did have significant fundraising over the last 48 hours since she got that endorsement from Joe Biden. And now, part of it that though, I will put this in the context of this fact: fundraising dried up considerably for Joe Biden over the last 2.5, 3 weeks when there was this massive push among the Democrat and media elites to push him out of the race. So when that change happened, there's that pin up energy, pin up willpower to donate to Kamala. So the question now becomes, is she just benefiting? She getting this one-time windfall from the fact that money really wasn't pouring in the last 2.5, 3 weeks? Or will this money continue to come in at high marks over the next month to 2 months?
Oh,
So
I
that
think that
remains to be seen.
yeah,
Go
no,
ahead,
they're
Dave.
gonna keep yeah, like, look, isn't this ironic? Like, the Democratic Party, which is essentially the party of the people, the billionaires decided that the man chosen by the people in the primary process, Joe Biden, like, they just turned off the funding tap, and then they forced him out, and then, like, Pelosi, stabbed the knife in. Like, does anyone else find that richly ironic that the party of quote unquote democracy is actually an oligarchy controlled by a cabal um, is actually an indictment of pure play democracy, right? Democracies, if you study history, always devolve into oligarchies. That's why we have a republican system of government. Point being, the money will come back out. Like I think the spigots will flow for Kamala. The Democrats are going to go in. I do think that they actually believe the rhetoric that this is an existential threat to them with Donald Trump. And so I think that they stopped the funding, they got rid of Joe, and now the billionaires will resume the funding to you know do what they can to push Kamala over the finish line. Um, that's ironic, right? Like again, it's an oligarchic party, the Democratic Party. It is not a democratic party. That it's a misnomer.
So another point I want to make is we touched on it last episode how much of this summer has not gone the way of the Democrats. Since that day, late May, that Trump was convicted, it's really been all downhill for them. They really haven't had any positive news cycle to speak of. And so they've been demoralized, they've been down. They see after last week a united Republican Party that had, by all accounts, even what Democrat pundits were saying, was a really strong unifying convention and a lot of momentum out of it. And so they were looking for something. They needed something to break their way. And they felt as though if Biden remained in the race, they weren't going to win. And so finally, they have a positive news cycle. And you spoke to it, Dane. They are going to go all in, especially from the media perspective, of raving about Kamala, her accolades, why she's great. I was watching, I think last night we stopped at my parents' house and they had NBC Nightly News on, and I forget whoever their woman anchor is at the White House. I don't know which one it was. Like she was talking about Kamala, and you could just see the excitement coming through her face. Like she couldn't hide her excitement. The fact that we're back. They truly do believe they're back. And so they got this a little bit of momentum. And I do think, I will say this, it's we can't become on our side complacent in
No,
thinking that we're just going to win just because the polling data might point a certain way and because Kamala's marks aren't great right now in the polls, but there is going to be this push by the media to really paint Kamala in a positive light in the weeks and months ahead and try to win over those independent voters that might be really on the fence right now or might be even be leaning Trump. Say, let me reconsider Kamala and give her a chance. And I don't think it was Kristen Welker. I see Gabriel in the chat. I don't think it was Kristen Welker. Who I'd have to think about it. But anyways, they're going to have some momentum now, and so expect the poll numbers to tighten up, and we'll see what happens. But before I toss it back over to you, Dane, now it comes to strategy, right? We had 2016 Hillary Clinton with the first female at the top of the ticket, and there was that debate and kind of how that was handled, but also put in the context of like Hillary was well known. most Americans had pretty strong opinions about her one way or the other. Kamala, maybe to a lesser extent, is known. She is the vice president of the United States, but again, I think to a lesser extent, she's known. So, from my perspective, again, somebody who wants Trump to win, like, what is the strategy? Like, first off, she's in charge of the southern border, and I do want to play a clip from NBC. This was an interview. I want to play this real quick of Kamala being interviewed by Lester Holt because I thought this was kind of entertaining. So hopefully
we are
you
going
will
to the
hear
border.
this. Can
We've
you hear
been
that,
to the
Dave?
border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And
So again, I don't know if did the audio play there, Dave?
Yeah, no, it played
Okay.
perfectly. Yeah.
Okay. So I saw that last night on, I think that was on not nightly news, whatever's on after that, Entertainment Tonight or whatever that show is after NBC on WFMJ. So there was that clip of that interview. And again, she was in charge. She's what the borders are or whatever. And we all know the Democrat Trump is destroying the Democrat, whoever, whether it be Biden or Kamala, in terms of head to head on immigration, and she was in charge of that. And so the mess is at her feet. She contributed to this mess, so I think a lot of the campaign needs to be on her on that point. Second thing is she was in on this cover up of Joe Biden. She knew he's been in decline. I probably could find some videos of her where she's defending him and, again, sharp as a tack, yada 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 yada, that sort of thing. And she has been covering that up. So if she's been covering that up, why would you want somebody like that in the White House who's just been completely lying to the American people the last year, 2 years about the condition of our president? And then lastly, because of Joe Biden's condition, I would argue that she's been the acting president of the United States the last 4 years. Um, I think a lot of people on the right would argue that there are people behind the scenes running this country right now, and I think she's one of those people at the forefront of running this country, while Joe Biden kind of just sits there as a figurehead. And so I would really be targeting her from that perspective. Now, when it comes to, you talked about that, what, Willie Brown or whatever his name was. When it
Willie
comes to the
Brown.
personal shots, I don't so much, whatever. Political pundits, people like us, they're going to talk about it. It's going to be out there. Like, there's nothing you could do, nothing you could stop about that. Whatever. To me, it's fair game. I do have resistance to Trump bringing this up, though. I fear it. There was that Trump, that the first 25, 30 minutes of his speech last week that had a certain tone to him. It seemed like he was a little bit different, maybe a little bit more measured in his remarks. I just fear that if he does that, you're going to turn off a lot of those people that may have voted for you in 16, went to Biden in 20, might be leaning your way and might just put those voters back into that independent category. I know that's a little controversial take. I know some on the right might not like to hear that. I just think he's got to avoid that. He could have a nickname for her. I
Cackling
just wouldn't go
Kamala.
something like that, whatever, but just stick with it, right? I just wouldn't constantly change it. You could have your nickname for her. You could attack her for all of her failings, her issues. I just would leave the personal shots to the pundits. That's just me. And just kind of makes Trump say, make it more about the issues and leave the personal shots to the other people. But Trump's Trump, right? He's going to do what he's going to do. He doesn't listen to people he certainly wouldn't listen to somebody like me. But I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts. I've been listening, Clay and Buck today and a few other people who kind of were a little unsure of how Trump's going to handle this, but it seemed like it was the topic of the day.
Well, I do think I think number one, if I were a Republican campaign chief, I would be very nervous, right? I would be very nervous. I don't think that the election is over. I think complacency is the wrong move, and I think if Democrats could surge back, there is a possible scenario where, emboldened by the Kamala Harris pick, they surge back and they take a commanding lead, and then states like Georgia, which have a heavy black population but are red, could become competitive again. So I would urge strongly against complacency. Even though I think she's a weak candidate, I think that the situation itself could easily turn on a dime. So that's number one. I agree with you on the strategy. I do agree. Look, like Kamala kind of reminds me. Do you? There are these kids in high school um, that would have like multiple things that they would put on their resume, and I guess these kids also survived into college, and they would be members of all these different clubs, and they really didn't do anything in all those clubs, right? Or and they would be in all the advanced classes, but like they were a mile wide and like an inch deep. And you talk to them and they have no engagement with the rich compendium of, the Western canon or, advanced skills, whether it's mathematics or music or whatever, right? They just are very good resume builders. And the argument is like, well, we've got experience. I've done all these things. And it's like, well, yeah, technically it's on your resume, but what did you actually do? Right. And those people are the absolute worst. They're like very HR woman. And I actually think that's insulting to HR ladies. Most of the ones I've worked with are nice, but it's a particular managerial energy of this like person that is really good at navigating the bureaucracy of whatever the institution is and not actually good at delivering results and not having the immediate feedback of their decisions affecting reality and reality affecting their decisions. Kamal is that person. So when they talk about her experience, they list like all these positions, and the same thing was true with Hillary. They'd be like, she was Secretary of State, yeah, and her tenure as Secretary of State was a total disaster, right? She's got experience; it's bad experience. When she was in the Senate, she voted for both the Afghan and Iraq wars. Like she made wrong decisions on every political major decision of our time. Kamala Harris, like, yeah, she was in these roles, but what did she actually do? What did she do in the US Senate? What did she do as California Attorney General? And I'm sure they could give you all these bullshit things. Like they could say, oh, like Biden's passed more legislation. These are just like fake things. These are like it's the same spirit, like, and I keep using the Soviet example because our regime is increasingly like the Soviet regime, where the Soviet Constitution had way more enumerated rights than the American one. But nobody would argue in actuality the Soviet regime was more free, right? So she's got all this experience and it's just fake experience and she's incompetent. She was the border czar and the border was an absolute disaster. We've had open borders, all the new job growth has gone to illegal immigrants. It's held down wages. It's had a horrible effect. It's driven up the cost of living. It's helped support inflation. It's made homes and rent more expensive. So this inflation issue is huge. It affects how we live our lives. You know, the America we grew up in, that's not the America that our kids are going to inherit. It's not going to look like and sound like and feel like the America that we grew up come of age in. And that's because of immigration. Like we've had a massive surge of people coming in, no simulation whatsoever, no attempts to become Americans, right? No buying into the country. They're just using us as a marketplace. Kamala was the border czar. She failed. I agree with you. Go after her on substance. The stuff about her sleeping her way to power, which is objectively true, should never not come from Trump because it's very bad. Trump has a weird history with women. I'm not going
That's
to
a good
go
point.
there, but we all know it. And it coming from Trump, it seems rich. And I totally agree with you. It will turn off a lot of people that might be receptive to him. But those are valid points that should be made by the pundit class. It just shouldn't come from, and I think the RNC is doing this, which is smart. Like if I'm elected a Republican official, if I'm Donald Trump, if I'm the campaign, my attack vector is her experience, what she's done, the disaster that the Biden administration is. And also, like you said, covering for Biden's dementia, right? And endangering the country. That's where I attack Kamala. The pundits, though, I think have every right to make the fact that like she's an empty suit and she's a bad person. Her staff has had like 97% turnover because usually these people that are status climbers and are strivers and that will fill up their resume, usually they're really nasty people, right? Because they know that they're fake. So they overcompensate their insecurities by projecting some false bravado, these girl boss types. And they're usually really nasty to people. I think you can really judge a person's character by how they treat the people underneath them, like waiters and waitresses. And Kamala is like horrible to her staffers, right? Um, that's why I'm always skeptical. Like you should be skeptical of any group or party that claims to speak on behalf of the downtrodden. Like there's a lot of like middle-aged white women that are really into social justice and care about like minorities. And it's like, wait a minute, what are you trying to cover for? Right? Like, why are you so into that? What are you actually covering for? I, that's my take. Like, focus on your own life, make your own life good. And then if everybody did that, we'd be fine. I want to go into one more thing. I'm going to change the topics on you, Michael. JD Vance and the JD Vance pick. Because here's one when I talked about a scenario in which she wins, the reality is she's going to have to pick her own vice president, right? She's the vice president. She's going to have somebody that will be the pro forma hypothetical vice president. That could move the needle. Like I'm looking at the Democratic lineup, and you got like Josh Shapiro, who's a wildly popular governor in Pennsylvania, Andy Beshear, who is a Democratic governor of a red state, Mark Kelly, who's kind of a centrist senator, astronaut. That's pretty cool. Like she's got some really good VP picks that could move the needle and really, I think, win over undecided voters. And I'm going to say something, and this is going to be a controversial statement, but I don't think the Vance pick was the right pick at this time. I think what Trump should have done is pick somebody like Glenn Youngkin. You solidify Virginia. Glenn Youngkin's term limited out. He's a very safe and boring and competent pair of hands. And a lot of people in the suburbs could feel comfortable with him stepping in the roles of the presidency. Trump is 78 after all, and he just barely survived an assassination. So there's a high probability that the VP could become president. Instead, Trump picked Vance, who there's a lot to like intellectually about Vance, but there are two big problems. Is one, he's only 39. He doesn't really have that much experience, right? He's a senator and he wrote a book and he was a venture capitalist, and those are all nice things, but it's also kind of like, what was the real meat there? So that's kind of I think that could be a liability. And two, if you look at his speech, which I think was a solid B. And you look at how he's been on the trail, he's showing a little bit of inexperience and a little bit of nervousness and jitters, and he's not that dynamic. And I say as somebody who's had him at my house and I like him and I think he could be VP, I think this is the inappropriate time for that. And I'm nervous about him on the campaign trail. And you put him up against a Mark Kelly, I feel like a Mark Kelly wins.
Interesting thoughts there. I actually agree with just about everything you said. It's we don't always see eye to eye. I mean, we lean a certain way, but we sometimes come from different angles. But I tend to agree with just about everything you said. And I'm going to pivot back to Kamala here in a second, but Kamala, whatever Kamala,
Yeah.
as this whoever this person is who hacked our private chat. I think you know this person. Anyways, yeah, I would have picked Glenn Youngkin as well. He's popular. He comes from a state that, although blue, he's popular in a blue state, but he is still conservative. I think he would have played well with suburban voters. Again, Vance, we talked about it last week. I just think from the perspective that Trump, maybe just because of the assassination, felt as though he was going to win and he could take somebody. He probably is more in line or aligned with Vance than Youngkin on policies and things like that. And so he probably felt as though after the assassination that he's going to win. And he's going to pick Vance. And even though it doesn't really provide you upside anywhere really on the electoral map, because Ohio is going to be solidly red. And it's a state that Vance only won by 6-7 points a couple of years ago, and that was really his first election at all. And so he is very intellectually smart. He knows policy, which is a good. I will say that is a good compliment to Trump, because Trump is not a policy guy, right? He's more high level. He has big picture type of things. You watch him in a debate, he's not really talking policies about worst president ever, this and that. We had the best president ever. By the way, we were playing this at work a couple weeks ago. Do you remember from the debate? There's a question about the environment. First time they asked it, he completely ignored it. Second time, he's like, my environmental people told me on the way out we had the cleanest environment in the history of the world. And then he said, we had H2O.
I don't remember that, but I'll take your word for it.
Clip. I'll have to find it and play it. So I tend to agree with your thoughts on Vance, and we'll get back to him here in a second. I did want to play another clip, though, of the Republican Party and kind of their stance on some advertisements or some media of their angling towards going after Kamala Harris. So let me play this for everybody.
Joe Biden was radical. If you thought Joe Biden was radical, just wait until you get to know Kamala Harris. She's dangerously liberal.
I am Kamala Harris. My pronouns are she and her.
You know, for far too long, the status quo thinking has been to believe that by putting more police on the street, you're going to have more safety. And that's just wrong.
You're confident this border's secure?
We have a secure border.
We're not going
Did
What
it
is
freeze
going
up?
on? I promise everybody, I do not have dial-up.
to treat people who are undocumented across the border as criminals. That's correct.
People who are convicted in prison, like the Boston Marathon bomber, on death row, they should be able to vote?
I think we should have that conversation.
Abolish ICE.
Yeah.
Is that a position that you agree with?
Listen, I think there's no question that we've got to critically re-examine ICE, and we need to probably think about starting from scratch.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's new darling of the party. She 60 Minutes this weekend proudly calling herself a radical, and she's promoting policies like saying that every single carbon emission in the country, every car, should be eliminated within the next 11 years, everything from a 70 to 80% tax rate. Do you agree that she could possibly, in this ideology of the socialist left, could splinter your party?
No, you know, I think that's fantastic.
I like how they like faded the light so that she had like a black and white image.
Oh yeah.
I think that's like I think that's a way more effective attack for normies. I agree with your basic thesis. Trump should stick away from the personal attacks. Maybe cackling Kamala and make fun of the fact that she's changed how she pronounces her name 18 times. But like this is an effective line of attack. I totally agree with you. But I just again I want to go back to the VP thing. Like I'm very nervous that if she picks a moderate Democrat, it could neutralize that attack line against her. And I don't know. I am nervous. I am nervous about the overall situation, Michael.
Yeah, it's one of those things where again, even if Trump feels that confident, clearly based on some reports, there's been some confidential memos that have been floating around where Trump's team expected it to be either Kamala or somebody else. They did not expect to be running against Biden. So he still had to have known in the back of his mind that there's very real chance that it wasn't going to be Biden. But I still think a term limited governor of a blue state that's popular and is conservative and won by winning over suburban voters would have been a better pick than Vance. And I'm looking in the chat here. I mean, Alpha Buckeye, you do bring up a good point. To be fair to Vance, he only won by 6 because he went up against a much harder and difficult opponent than someone like DeWine, who went up against loony lefty Nan Whaley there. I like what you said there. And Democrats in the media said Tim Ryan was their best nominee in 2022. He was way more fun than anyone else. And then Vance beating Ryan was the equivalent to Marino beating Sherrod Brown. And we'll eventually at some point talk about that race. I'm not overly confident, actually, about Bernie Moreno beating Sherrod Brown, which would be a huge disappointment in a state that has been trending more and more Republican since 2016. So again, back to that video real quick. I think it's just a good illustration of kind of just her. It's like a reintroduction of sorts. Most of the time, you see the president on TV. You don't often see the vice president as much. And so, if you're just an average normie, as you called it, just an average voter who might not follow politics so closely, and seeing that, I think that's the impression they're trying to make. Is like this is who is now at the top of the Democratic ticket. This is what she stands for. She's proud of those pronouns. I'm sure you saw that clip where she says, like, I'm Kamala Harris. My pronouns are she, her. I'm wearing a blue suit or something like that.
Yeah.
She's at the head of the table.
Did
It's like,
she do
what
the
world do we
land
live in,
acknowledgement?
Dane? What's that?
Did she do the land acknowledgement too, where you're like, I'm on occupied land. This is Comanche land. That's like the new thing too, right? This is I don't think she did, but I did see that clip. Yeah, so we'll see. I will say one positive note. Like I feel like Kamala Harris, whatever her name, Madame Harris, is the candidate the Democrats should be running. Like Biden is a vestige of a older time where you had like Irish Catholic white men corralling various minority groups into a cohesive entity, and they called it the Democrats. And him, exiting stage left on history, and this oligarchic coup is also very fitting for the Democratic Party and who they've evolved to become. And Kamala represents, to me, she is the modern Democratic Party, like made flesh, right? Um, so I think that it's good she's running. I think it's good she's going up, and I am excited about the the dynamism of the race now that she's in the running. To me, like if Trump represents the '80s yuppie fantasy of being like wearing big ties, power broker, real estate deals. Kamala represents that yuppie fantasy updated for the 2020s. And to me, like Kamala is the embodiment of like the white liberal woman that, her husband is a private equity investor outsourcing American jobs. She's living off his wealth. She has a hate has no home here sign. And in this house, we believe. And she's like on Xanax and wine constantly. She's like the wine mom, the California mom. And like whatever is the trendy thing of the day, like mindfulness. Remember when mindfulness was really big? It's like, why don't you just pray to God like a normal vanilla person? No, 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 no. We're practicing mindfulness. That's Kamala Harris, right? And she's racial, but she's not like I'm gonna say something that's kind of rude, but it's a true point. She's not a black woman. She's a half black woman. She's half Indian. Um, which is also interesting in how this Indian minority in America has seen itself rise very dramatically on both parties, like Vivek and Nikki Haley. Um, and she's the daughter of college professors. Her father was like a Marxian college professor, so she represents this new person, this new class, this cosmopolitan transnational elite American managerial class, very California, very West Coast base. I have hope that that is extremely alienating to the work Rust Belt and the voters of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania in particular, which is why if she picks Shapiro, she'd be very smart. I don't think she will, because Shapiro is Jewish, and the Democratic Party currently has a revolt of its Muslim population because of the support of Israel. Um, that's just a cold hard fact. But so I don't know. I think like Kamala represents the Democratic Party. She is the DEI candidate. Like she was chosen because of race. She's not very good as a politician. Um, and like they are celebrating that, right? They want it both ways. It's the first black woman presidential candidate, but she was not chosen because of her race. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Let's see here. I'm looking in the chat. One question I do want to ask those who are tuning in live, drop your comments in the chat. Who do you think Kamala will end up picking as her VP candidate? I'll say, from my perspective, I agree, Dane. I think Shapiro from Pennsylvania would make the most sense on the surface because he's popular and she needs Pennsylvania. That's 19 electoral votes. We're going to get into that in a second.
Huge.
And it would be huge. It would, again, sort of like you said, it would sort of be like the equivalent of picking a Youngkin to really try to shore up. There's mixed evidence on how much a VP candidate helps, but when you're coming from, you're a popular person in that state, it certainly isn't going to hurt you. It could add, especially if you're looking at independents. Say, hey, you know what? He picked our governor. I may have voted for that governor who's pretty popular. I respect him. Might not like the top of the ticket, but I know I like the VP pick. I'm going to vote that way. It could be the difference, especially in an election that's going to be tight in some of these swing states like Pennsylvania, between Kamala winning Pennsylvania or Trump winning Pennsylvania. So because he's Jewish and because of Trump and this administration doing everything in their power to walk a tightrope with the Jewish population and the Muslim population and those voting blocks of the Democrat Party and how it impacts the state of Michigan, I don't see her going that way. It does seem like that Bashir from Kentucky, more of a moderate type guy, I see him going after Trump. I think he's eager to be the VP, and I think he's hungry for it. It's weird with those southern states and how they kind of at the statewide level will ignore the R versus D thing. I think doesn't like Louisiana have a Democrat governor? I know Kentucky
John
does.
Bell Edwards. I don't know if he's currently the governor. I have to look that up. Bashir's father was governor too. Keep that in mind. The Bashirs are
Yeah.
this family dynasty. Um, she picks Mark Kelly. It's clearly going to be Mark Kelly, the astronaut, because he's an astronaut. That's kind of cool. It's not going to be Shapiro. He's Jewish. It's not going to be Pritzker. He's too fat, and it's not going to be Andy Bashir. I think he probably just clashes with her on a personal level. I think it'll be Mark Kelly. I will put dollars to donuts. It's going to be Mark Kelly.
So then I guess the question there, obviously Arizona is a toss-up state. Prior to dropping out, Trump was ahead there. And again, this is a state that went Democrat 2020, went Democrat in 2022 as well at the Senate level. Trump was ahead by 5.8 points there. And what's
Yeah.
been probably most fascinating, I think it's a good segue into looking at the electoral map. I'm going to put up another site here. Give me 1 second here while I do this. I'm going to put up the Electoral College screen here. And I've just been kind of playing around with this while throughout the episode and kind of just looking here at the states. And what's been fascinating is when you look at a state like Arizona and a state like Nevada, two states, again, that the Democrats won and have been successful the last 4 years in. Trump was ahead by 5.6 in Nevada. Trump was ahead by 5.8 points in Arizona. And it's interesting from that perspective, Dane, because what's going on out there in the Sun Belt that has led to a deterioration of the Democrat vote? Is it immigration? Is it something else? What do you attribute that to? Because
That's a really good
again, this
question.
kind of goes to your comment about
A
Mark Kelly, but
really good
it's
question.
been one of the fascinating things. We live up here in the Rust Belt. We live here in Northeast Ohio. I'm not in tune with Sun Belt politics to understand why Trump all of a sudden, after losing those two states, is outperforming in both of them. I mean, I just mentioned being ahead by Biden by almost 6 points in both. That means a 6-point swing in both. So what's going on out there in the Sun Belt? And do you think that if you put Kelly on the ballot in a state or on the Democrat ticket, is that enough to carry Arizona? And would that be enough also maybe to carry Nevada?
So I would add to that question, Georgia is another state that was blue that has trended 5 points red. So it's Georgia, it's Nevada, it's Arizona, even North Carolina, which voted red in 2020. The margin's like 8 to 9%. So it's had that hard swing similarly. It's a really good question. Nevada is interesting. It's like one of these, it's like the Lucy football for Republicans. They're always really close to winning it. And then at the last minute, a bunch of votes comes in from, I don't know, is it Henderson County? And then they lose. I don't know. If I had to guess, and I'm thinking out loud here, I would venture that the in the immigration issue has become particularly potent in areas like Nevada and Arizona, and even maybe Georgia. I think immigration may have driven up the cost of living and rent in those areas. And, if you look at like a Nevada or an Arizona, they're really urban states. That there's not like a rural heft to it like in Ohio or Pennsylvania in particular or Iowa. So if you have people coming in, they're clustering in the cities, they're driving up rent, they're certainly driving up housing prices. But with the rent prices going up, I think that would be my guess is that there's just been a lot of immigration and it's put a lot of cost of living pressure and the inflation issue is really hitting these workers. And Nevada has always had a blue collar bent to it relative to other states. It sounds bougie. And so if your thesis is the immigration and the inflation issue is squeezing, call it the working class workers, and those are the ones that have moved most from Biden in 2020 to Trump in 2024, then it kind of makes sense that the states like Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia are the ones, and even Pennsylvania, which has seen like a 5 point consistent Trump lead almost outside of the margin of error, that these are the states that are feeling it. That's kind of like maybe that's the theory.
Hey, you have a better theory than I do.
And about Mark Kelly swinging it, I don't know. I don't think Mark Kelly swings Nevada, but he might be able to swing Arizona. I don't know how popular he is. I know he was very popular. I don't know if he still is very popular, but I think he does well in like the Rust Belt. Like a Mark Kelly is not Sun Belty enough that he wouldn't appeal in the Rust Belt. Like the fact that he's an astronaut, I could see some independent Ohio voter being like, "Oh, that guy seems like a reasonable guy."
Good points. So, in looking here at the map, if you, yeah, we're asking me as of today, July 23rd, what I view the map to be as of this point. This is kind of where I'm leaning right now based on polling data and just kind of my feeling of maybe projected misses in the polling with certain states. Like I know Trump's up ahead in Michigan right now. I just something tells me that I don't know what it'll be. Something whether it's the Islamic vote or something like that will push Kamala over the top there. And I obviously I could be wrong, but it still positions Trump in a good spot right now to defeat Harris. But I think what's interesting, you were talking about Arizona, you were talking about Georgia. If I were to swing these real quick, just for shits and giggles, and I accidentally just changed South Carolina. Anyways, look at that. And I know
Wow.
there's scenarios where
Wow.
it could be 269, 269. But I mean, this is in theory a map that could happen. I do question, and I guess that we're talking about the VP impact on this electorally. I think we need to talk about Kamala's impact and where she plays well.
Fair.
I don't know how well she's going to play in the Rust Belt. I think somebody in the chat was talking about it earlier. I don't necessarily think that just Kamala being, half black is going to contribute to a groundswell of support for her among black voters. So I do question how much she's going to be able to turn out the black vote, let's say in Philly, in Cleveland, maybe in Detroit and Milwaukee. And will it be enough in those swing states to help her preserve that blue wall? Obviously, she's not going to win Ohio, but I don't know how well she's going to play up here in the Rust Belt in the Great Lakes. The question is, does she play? I don't know. I saw an MSNBC anchor talking about again the black vote, and she said, "Well, maybe that means a state like Georgia." But again, just because this is evidence, you swing a state like Georgia, and hell, even Arizona, doesn't mean you're necessarily going to win. So where does Kamala help the Democrats electorally on the map?
That's a good question, and I think like and somebody said in the chat, I don't I'm the reason to fear Kamala is twofold. One is threefold. She boosts enthusiasm among Dem voters and Dem donors. That's point one. Two, she gets the cover of the media which has been critical of Biden now all of a sudden is protecting her and they're pulling their punches. Three, she gets a VP candidate who is a dynamic figure and shifts the battleground. Those are the three reasons to be afraid of her. But to your point, I think that this California wino mob, right, is a particularly off-putting person to the Rust Belt states. I genuinely believe that. And I think her comments on immigration, but also on energy and fracking and natural gas and oil and like the Green New Deal, I think that might be the reason why Pennsylvania is swinging so hard to the right, because there were a lot of working class Dems. I mean, keep in mind, Biden was from Scranton, right, PA, that might have been sympathetic to a Biden, but now Kamala gets up there and she's just culturally alien. And I don't mean culturally alien in the sense that she's black. Pennsylvania voted for Trump or for Obama twice. So I don't think it's a race thing. I think it's just she's so Californian in her outlook, um, that she just turns off the Rust Belt. And that's why if I'm a Dem, I'm like, okay, I've got a window to kind of push through and consolidate and take gains because over time, the more she gets on the stage and the screen, I just don't see her playing well. And I'll go a step further. And your map there is amazing. If you're listening, it's Harris 268, Trump 270. So Trump wins. That's with Georgia blue and Arizona blue, right? Um, I would go a step further, and I think that a state like Michigan is showing that it's trending kind of reddish. They voted for Trump in 16. They backed Biden, but like there's been data on a congressional district in Michigan which shows that Trump is leading in all of those districts. Pennsylvania has, I'm shocked by how far to the right it has. I still don't trust it. I'm inherently skeptical of any Pennsylvania data.
Same here.
It's like a 5-point Trump margin outside of the margin of error. So you flip Michigan, and then there were a few polls that showed New Jersey where Trump was tied or leading. Now, I don't think Trump's going to win New Jersey, but to me, that shows that maybe something is going on here in the Rust Belt. And if I'm a Republican, I would love to go up against Kamala in the Rust Belt, right? She just has that. She has that vibe. She has that energy, that nonchalance, right? That kind of that arrogance. The one thing I will say, and this is the one issue we haven't talked about, and maybe it's a good way to wrap it up, is the abortion issue. I have a feeling like the one thing that keeps the Rust Belt blue is abortion. I think Rust Belt voters are very moderate and maybe even center left on abortion. So I think you could find a voter that is anti-immigration, pro-fracking, but wants legal abortion. I think that voter is real, and I think depending upon the election, they'll vote blue or red. I think there are a lot of them out there. I think particularly white working class women are blue on abortion, but lean to the right on other issues. And I suspect that Kamala will double down and triple down on the abortion issue. And if anything is moving the ground, I think it could be that. I also think young voters are highly open to the abortion issue, and that can mobilize them. And the abortion issue isn't as, even though Biden was a pro-choice guy, having a woman on stage arguing about abortion could move votes. It could excite the base. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Like that, I think their strategy, if I'm Kamala, it's going to be abortion 24/7, and don't mention gun control, don't mention immigration. Trump is a criminal, abortion, and like I don't know what else you could talk about. Like raise taxes on billionaires. I guess. I don't know. What's the Democratic platform nowadays?
Abortion, abortion, abortion.
Abortion,
I mean,
abortion.
honestly, like if you look at the polling data, that's like the one issue that this cycle they're ahead on. But I will say
Yeah,
this, and I know it got. And listen, I'm as pro life as they come. But the Republicans, I think by design and because of some of the losses at the state levels, avoided the push for a national abortion ban at 20 weeks. The only thing I would have said there would have been maybe encourage maybe states to look at that. I wouldn't have done the federals thing because for decades the Republicans were from the perspective of it's a state issue, it's a state
I
issue,
agree.
and
I
I
agree.
would say for consistency's sake, you need to
Yes,
remain that way and keep the federal government out of it. Because if you're going to push that, Lord knows they're going to push something when they're in charge,
that's right.
and when the Democrats are in power to make it full blown. And so to me, if I were the Republicans, and again, I understand because of the losses that you've seen in Ohio and Kansas and some of these other red states on the issue of abortion, avoiding it in the platform. The only thing I would have done, and hopefully moving forward, we could find that middle ground on abortion on the statewide issue. If it's a 20-week ban with exceptions for rape and incest and life of the mother, something that prevents it from being late term abortions, but something that could also actually win in a statewide level, something that's a reasonable compromise. Because unfortunately, since Roe versus Wade got overturned, abortion numbers have actually grown, and that's
Well, wait,
defeating, I
abortion
guess.
numbers being the actual abortions performed or support for abortion?
Uh, Actual performed in a number of states
Oh,
because
really?
it's opened it up. I mean, just think of, for instance, let's just say Ohio, for instance, right? There was a heartbeat bill, so by and large, there were not many abortions taking place at all in Ohio. But now with this new legislation, it's pretty much legal, right? Think of Kansas, some of these other states. I know Florida's doing something like that. So we'll have to see what happens there. I mean, that is a big issue, I know, for a lot of the Democrats. They're going to be pushing hard on it, but I think Trump's kind of taking the right approach, contrary to maybe what some on the pro life community would like to see, which is kind of just leave that up to the states. It's not a federal thing. I'm not going to support a federal thing. I think he says like, I'm okay with abortion with the exceptions and that's my stance on it. So can't angle too hard on that if you're the Democrats. The other point is back to Nevada and the impact of the culinary union and Trump's proposal of not taxing tips. And that's huge out there. And that could be the difference between Harris winning that state in the 6 electoral votes or Trump winning that state in the 6 electoral votes. So we'll kind of see. It'll be really interesting to watch the polling in the weeks ahead. I don't really think we're going to have a true feel for this, maybe till the second week of August polling wise, because by then I think they're going to have their VP pick. Because I will add one more point. There's that law in Ohio that they need to have their nominee by August 7th or something, and they extended it to September 1st. But I again was watching the news yesterday, and the Democrats are still going to have a virtual convention to nominate their candidates in early August. So they're going to have a VP pick here in the next week and a half. And so I think once we see whoever that pick is, I would say by mid-August, we'll have a feel of where this race really stacks up. I obviously, I think just with the pure momentum and the money now, Democrats have some enthusiasm behind them. The real question is whether that translates to margins coming in favor of Kamala or not, where the polling shows it really wasn't that was going to happen. But I think we'll see a bit of a bump for her, just some enthusiasm for her. And the question is going to be the all important independent vote. And some of the polling data has not been good for her on that. And so if she has any chance, she's going to have to do that. And the other thing, I'll leave you with one last point before we try to wrap this up. Obviously, we elect presidents based on the Electoral College here in the United States. But if you see these popular vote polls continuing to show Trump ahead or even tied, that's going to point towards a Trump victory, Dane. I mean,
Yeah.
let's get real here. 2004 is the last time the Republicans won the electoral or the national popular vote. And, 2016, Trump won the Electoral College, didn't win the popular vote. 2020, what? 20,000 votes in one state, 20,000 votes in another state, maybe 60 to 80,000 votes total across 4 states. And he lost the popular vote by 6-7 points. And he still could have easily had won. It was that close in the individual states. So if Trump were tied, I think that's the key. If he could keep those national popular vote polls around a tie, he's going to be poised to be the favorite heading into the fall. Any thoughts there?
I agree. Trump wins all ties. I think he's still in the lead. I think the data is still too early on polling. Some have shown a bump for Kamala. Some have shown Trump actually increasing his lead. Some have shown no change. I think it's too early. One thing this election season has taught us is that, stand by. We have no idea how things can change over the next 24 hours, let alone 1 week. So who knows, right? Who knows where and how this race evolves? So yeah, I think I think there'll be more twists and turns.
Absolutely. Looking in the chat here, I think she will need to choose Gabriel in the next 2 weeks because of August 7th and the deadline to get on. And that's right, Gabriel. But I could have sworn that Republicans and Governor DeWine extended that by 3 weeks. But nonetheless, I think they're going to continue with that virtual convention. So we'll wrap it up there. We wanted to get this in a week after episode 40, just because, again, still a lot's happening. It's a fluid situation. We'll be curious to see what Joe Biden looks like tomorrow. I know he had phoned in, we think, although it looks like it may have been a recording of himself into Kamala's campaign event yesterday, and he didn't sound good. And I'll be curious to see how he looks tomorrow, how he speaks, how COVID, if it did further damage to him or not. And then the question is going to be, I mean, I think you would agree with me, Dane. If he comes out and has another flop of a press conference or whatever this is, a speech, the argument's going to be from the Republicans and many independents is he should step aside, and will he be willing to do that? And maybe the perspective there is if it looks like it's going to be Kamala, maybe he just does it. She becomes the incumbent.
It's just, God, it's so gross to think that she would be the first woman vice president or president of the United States. It's so sad. Like, at least Hillary had the will to power. In Hillary, for all her faults, there was an ego and an ambition there. And, like, she was a capable politician and an intelligent individual. Kamala is just somebody who has slithered around the halls of power and through sheer happenstance takes the throne, right? She's a very different person than Hillary. Like, even Obama, right? Obama was kind of this mirage, this empty suit that you could project your own ideology into him. And he was very good at that. And I think he consciously knew he was this empty suit. And so he pursued power. Um, and and that was kind of appealing in some sort of sense. But, like, Kamala she just slithers around, and she's just, everyone keeps dying at the top, and she's just rising the ranks because people keep, like, knocking each other off, and she reminds me of the Emperor Claudian or Claudius uh, of Rome. He had a speech impediment, and they assumed that he was mentally deficient, and he wasn't. He just was a poor speaker. He had a lisp or a stutter, but he was mentally very, very sharp. And so nobody killed him. They would kill the other emperors, and then he eventually became emperor, right? That's Kamala. That's her energy. She's like wino mom meets Emperor Claudius. But he was a decent emperor. She, I don't think, will be. So we'll see. Hey, this episode is brought to you by Haribo Gold Bears. If you're a middle-aged white guy and you're thinking to yourself, what am I doing with my life? I need to eat away the pains and the stress of being a father and working a middle-class life. Haribo Gold Bears are here for you. They're juicy, they're gummy. They taste like they were manufactured in a factory in Germany that used to make Panzer tanks. Haribo Gold Bears, they've sponsored this episode.
Question about those, Dane. Aren't those notorious for making people have to, go number 2?
I
Please
don't
tell
know.
me you knew that.
No.
Yeah, just Google. Yeah. Yeah, they apparently used to have an ingredient in them that makes you have to, if you're a little backed up, kind of progress things along. Sort of like a tastier way of getting some fiber into your diet.
I think those are the sugar-free ones, Michael.
That could be. But yeah, that's what they were known for back in the day.
Oh, maybe that's what I'm doing. Maybe it's a way to lose weight, just eating gummy bears.
I think if you really want a treat, you need to look. Oh, I need to stop. You need to go on Amazon and read some of the reviews for some of these. I think it's a certain type, like you just mentioned that. Yeah, like here's one here, Haribo, some sugarless one. Gummy bears, beware of the laxative effect. Do yourself a favor and read those after this episode.
Okay,
Boy,
I'm doing it.
I didn't expect to end talking about that, but I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank everybody in the chat tonight for your comments. We appreciate it. I encourage you again. I said it last episode. This is a season of the year where everybody is really in tune to politics right now and are really into it. So if you enjoyed this episode, I'd encourage you to share it, whether it's on Twitter, on Facebook. Share it with your family, your friends, your coworkers. I know I have coworkers that are like mine, and make sure you share it with them and get them on board. Have them follow us on Facebook, follow us on X, Twitter, and definitely if you also are watching right now on YouTube, please click that subscribe button.
Hit the like button.
Hit the like button, the subscribe button, and I think you even hit that little bell. Then you get notified every time we go live. So that's always a cool thing. So, and Gabriel, we're not really at that point with our a couple hundred people who actually tune into this to have any real sponsors yet. But Dane knows people. He has connections out there, and I think he could land us a big sponsor one day.
Haribo.
Haribo, the gummy bear
sponsor. It's like $1 billion gummy bear empire. It's not big enough for you, Michael. Yeah, they're sponsoring the show.
Yeah. So with that, we'll communicate out with when we'll have our next episode. We'll see maybe if it's next week or not, depending upon where things stand in the political world. And continue to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I'll try to keep those up to date and active. And again, just encourage everybody, share this with your family, share this with your friends, your coworkers, anybody who agrees with us, especially politically, or even those who don't, so we can win them over. And the podcast, I'm going to try to have it up tomorrow. So if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, be sure to like us there and leave us a review. And with that, any final closing words, Dane? Any good quotes that you want to leave us with from a politician of
I
some
have
sort?
to. You think you fell out of the coconut tree? You exist in the context of all that you've been. And I want you to live your life unburdened by what has been and focused on what can be. I got those
Wow.
from our Vice President Kamala Harris. So
What
your quote.
powerful words to end
Yeah.
episode 41 of the MV Red podcast. We thank Vice President Kamala Harris for those powerful words
You
that
think you
leave
fell out of the coconut
a
tree?
lasting impression on all of us. So with that, we'll wrap it up. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in and for your comments.